When Image Comics was founded in 1992, how did they get popular? How did anybody know to go get comics from Image? It was a new publisher. The newsstands were filled with Marvel and DC. These characters have been around forever. How did Image manage to break through, make such a big impact, sell so many comics, and generate so much attention, given they were indies, given they were a bunch of art guys with no marketing degrees? How did they do it? Why, first of all, how did they do it? And why does it matter so much for today? Hey everybody, this is Perch, talking about Image in the 90s, and specifically Image in 92, and Image's launch, their release, their creation of basically a new comic company. How did they manage to accomplish this? Well, there's a bunch of little pieces in there, but the biggest is they were using tools that don't exist today, by and large, to get the message out. Now, if I could take you back to 92, I have a shop. I've got comics. I'm selling lots of X-Men #1 with Jim Lee and Chris Claremont. I've got X-Force coming in and people like that. And Todd McFarlane always sells Spider-Man. And so lots of comics are coming out and being sold. And it seemed like the world of kind of Marvel dominance, particularly for splashy art and kind of really big selling mass market titles, was going to last forever. DC at the time was starting to carve out a nice little world for people who, forgive me for saying it this way, but maybe preferred stories and were looking for a little bit more plot-driven comics. These are the kind of the two dynamics that were really happening. And then a year later, like 1 year after you saw huge sales on Spider-Man and X-Men and X-Force and other things, these guys leave to go do Image. And keep in mind, I'm running a comic shop, but lots of comics are still being sold in the newsstand. The newsstand was still critical for driving recognition, interest, understanding of these characters. People are going to grocery stores, gas stations, Walden Books, B. Dalton's, places like that, to look for comics. And Image was not going to be there, or at least they didn't have a footprint. The mass market didn't know that these characters in this company existed. They certainly knew the artist existed because that was what driving sales, but it's not like they were getting a little ad inside of a Marvel comic saying, well, I'm Todd McFarlane, I live in Spider-Man, but you can check me out over in Spawn, I'll see you over there. None of that was happening. So how did the attention get gathered? Because Image did launch to a big splash, at least in the comic shops. Well, the biggest reason, and by the way, I want to dispel one thing, because I was listening to, it may have been Rob Liefeld. It was one of the podcasts. The Image guys were saying, well, we were going to conventions, and we were rock stars there, and we were, and they were kind of building up that as the reason why people knew they existed, why they followed them, why Image got what it got. But the reality was, most people, most comic fans have never been to a comic convention. And it's a weird statement to make, but if you think about the people buying comics who are purchasing them year in, year out, the comic convention is kind of like a golden unicorn out there that one day you may hope to go to, but you're not going to San Diego Comic-Con on a regular basis. You're not inside like I think a lot of people within comics like to believe the audience is. The majority of the audience is not. They're getting their cues, especially in the 90s, in 92. The comics are being sold in the newsstand and in certainly direct market, but people are not traveling around for comic conventions. This idea is absurd. The amount of people who are going and kind of being part of that world was less than 5%, and even that might be a little generous. Today it's a little bit different, but it's still not as different as people think. But regardless, so what was it that drove Image? And there's a lot of little things. Certainly people like Rob Liefeld going on talk shows, and they had all kinds of people showing up at different parts of pop culture. You had the Levi Jeans commercials. You had these kind of guys getting known. But there was one piece that really drove comic fans to Image, and that was Wizard. Wizard, not a Wizard, Wizard magazine. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. So you're telling me that comic fans who are not going to conventions and not being insiders are getting information from Wizard? And the answer is, yeah. I mean, Wizard magazine sold better in my comic shop than the majority of comics. It was an extremely well, it was purchased. It was liked. It had the right elements. It had certainly articles, and it kind of stole the idea that it was a price guide for comics, even though the prices in there were often really dubious. But it also, you'd get free stuff. You'd get ash cans, and you'd get little preview comics. You'd get trading cards. You'd get stuff inside of Wizard. And so for people who are collecting comics and interested in comics, Wizard was a pretty key thing that you had to have. If you're gonna be collecting comics, you had to have Wizard. And I know a lot of people who would come in and they would buy Wizard over other comics and open Wizard first and go through that before they actually read the comics. And Wizard went all in on Image. Wizard was promoting kind of the comics, the artists, where people were moving around, what stories. They were promoting that heavily. If there was nothing else that Image was, it was a marketing vehicle that simply does not exist today. That's what we're getting to. But if Wizard had not existed, I don't believe that the Image revolution would have been anywhere close to as big as it was. Yes, these artists were big names, and yes, they were drawing attention and everything else, but Wizard drove people to find Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane. They wouldn't have found them otherwise. There was a lot of people who went from one place to the other. Now you might say, oh, but wait a second. Wizard wasn't sold through the newsstand, and that's actually not true. Wizard often was. Wizard was the connective thread, and because that Wizard was doing a good job of basically having the ash can issues or the 0.5 issue or other things. Even in Marvel and DC were promoting Wizard because it was a way for them to kind of shuffle off some of their marketing responsibility on this other party that was making this weird hybrid of a news magazine and a marketing vehicle and some actual comic content and a price guide. It was a lot of things in Wizard that didn't necessarily go all together. And some of the articles and things within it were, goofy completely. But it still was the connective thread between, basically fans who want to read comics and comics they hadn't heard of yet or didn't know were happening. I'd love to play out the kind of the whole game of what happened. But if there was no Wizard, then Image would have taken a much longer time to get going and get the sales. Because one of the things that basically helped it was that on day one, with the first issue of Cyberforce and Wildcats and Youngblood and Spawn, you were selling 100,000 plus copies of these comics, in many cases higher than that. And you had interest from the very beginning, even though it was a brand new property, brand new company, and people didn't know it existed. Still, there was a way for the fans to kind of find their way from X-Force or from X-Men or from Spider-Man, to Spawn, to Youngblood, to Wildcats, to these other comics. There was that pipe from one to the other. It was not people staying up late to watch Dennis Miller, although Rob Liefeld's appearance on Dennis Miller is hysterical. But still, that was how people got from point A to point B. Now, why this matters so much, or why I think it should maybe alarm people, and or maybe it creates a business opportunity, is today that doesn't exist. The equivalent of Wizard is Bleeding Cool and Newsarama. And those places do a horrible job of marketing comics. They're out for kind of, clickbait in the day. They're not looking in the long term. They're not looking to build any business other than their ad revenue. And so the absence of that means that the burden is put on the creator themselves to try and drum up interest through social media, but it's easy to just get lost there. And then that brings up the whole point of, like, is a creator supposed to use social media to promote their projects or talk about their life or what's going on there? It's a whole other problem. The distributors, Diamond doesn't do this. Yes, they put out a previews catalog, but that's like, in many cases, watching paint dry and is terrible outside the big two. The other factor, just you could do stuff online, but it's half baked, and the publishers never really learned how to market themselves. And even though this really impacts the abilities for indies to succeed and get known and get the word out, it's also, as we can see, clearly impacting Marvel and DC. Their marketing is all over the place, and because they never learned really how to do it. They were relying for a long time on Wizard just kind of doing it for them. And here's where we are. So I give a lot of suggestions. I try and do videos giving advice on indie creators of how to kind of make themselves stand out, get the word out, kind of become known. And I'll keep doing that. But one problem is that it is on their shoulders, and they didn't have that vehicle, Wizard. They don't have that today. That was really putting the effort into promotion. And it's funny because it's one of those things that if somebody put a really serious effort into becoming the Wizard of 2020, I think it would be a success, a pretty big success, because it's still needed. People still want it. In fact, arguably, people want it more. And it's, there's more need for it. There's more publishers, there's more product, there's more content, there's more diversification of the stuff that's out there. It's a product that is desperately needed. Unfortunately, the people who found it are, one, going to need to lose money for a while, two, going to need to be very disciplined in terms of putting out a publishing schedule and getting things out and marketing successfully, and three, where does that stuff get sold? Where, if you had a Wizard magazine today, where is it going to get sold? Most people will say, well, it would need to be digital or a website of some kind. But then that sends you down the path of needing to fund it in some way through ads. And as soon as you're doing that, then it changes the entire way you're looking at the whole project. You're no longer doing it about promotion. And I think the other problem is the people who have expressed interest in doing this, they don't have the trust of the big two, and that may be impossible to gain anyway, because those guys are going to be, very hot and cold about working with you. And so if you start to work with the people who will give you attention, sooner or later you're not seen as somebody who's helping out the industry in general, but you're seen as competitive by others. And then as soon as that happens, it's fallen into the trap at that point, and it's very hard to recover. But it's a hard problem. But that's why. How did Image get so big so fast on day one? Yes, absolutely the talents of the individuals. Make no mistake about it. But the reason why their talents were found and why they didn't have to build back their audience after working at Marvel and having the name there is because Wizard was around to help them do that. But what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you remember Wizard? Do you hate Wizard? Am I giving it way too much importance and everything? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, but most importantly, thanks for listening.